Women today are faced with a choice: have a career or have kids. And after decades of women pursuing careers, it seems we've come to the realization that we cannot have it all, at least not at the same time. And the regrets are piling up. How did we get here? And how can we move forward so that we don't have regrets? I'm Terry Barton, and my goal is to help you navigate the issues and concerns you have today by bringing the Christian worldview into the conversation. Last week, we talked about careers and how our mindset about our careers can impact our happiness. We also talked about how women are conditioned from a young age to believe that they should have a career in order to have a fulfilling life. And 71% of people said that career was top of the line. That's what would help them feel like they had a fulfilling life and would give their life meaning. 61% had said it was friends that would do it. 26% said children. 24% said money. And 23% said marriage. Now, out of all of those, career was 74% the top choice for women, and children were only 22% of what might make for a fulfilling life for women. There's also another study that pointed out 74% of those surveyed said that child free employees are expected to work overtime more often than parents. So we have quite a disconnect in our culture today between, having kids and not having kids, and having a career and not having a career. And women live in this really strange place where we have had a lot of focus on career, and we fight a lot to try and make ourselves um, known, and to be able to move up a corporate ladder if we're in a corporate situation, or to make a name for ourselves and be respected in the workplace. And so there's a lot of, if I have a kid and I'm trying to do all of that, it's going to no one's probably ever said this, but they probably think it's going to make them look less capable or less able, um, and maybe also less boss like. And on the flip side, you have people who don't have kids who think that, it seems like all the work gets dumped on them because, they don't have kids. They don't have to spend time with their family. They can take on the overtime. So there's a lot of struggle where kids are concerned in the career realm. Not so long ago, there was an article that came out, and the title of it was "I Regret Having Children." So I don't know if you saw that, but in that article, there was a mother who talked about, or at least one of the mothers talked about feeling angry and alone because she gave up her dream career in order to stay home with her 3-year-old daughter. And I found that kind of really sad because when my kid was 3 years old, I was not staying home with him. I was actually working a job and kind of really needed to work that job. And I found myself in a completely different moment. I uh, actually wanted to be able to stay at home with him at that moment. As a kid, I was asked about career far more often than I was asked about anything else that might be in my future. Far more than if I was going to get married or who I was going to marry, if I wanted to have kids or not. Career was the top question, the top concern it seemed that everyone had for me. And as a result, I went with it. I focused on a career, and I did get married, but I focused on a career first and foremost. Me and my husband, we didn't have any plans when we got married to have kids. And so this focus of career was easy. I didn't have competing, um, I didn't have anything to compete for my time. My husband totally backed my career. He knew what my goals were before we ever got married. He was dating me while I was in college, so he knew exactly what I was striving to do. And so he was supportive of that. Where things took a detour, though, is when I had my first kid, actually, my only kid. We ended up with only one. That's a whole other story. But eventually, we did decide we wanted to have kids. And so our child came about a year earlier than we anticipated. I also didn't anticipate how being a mother was going to change my life. Now, I'm not just talking about as far as career goes, but there was a lot that I learned from having a kid and also having a career at the same time. And we'll get to that. I'll share those thoughts towards the end. First, let me give you a Bible verse, something that's really important to know and something that I think had an impact on me and my husband deciding that we wanted to have kids after all. In Psalms 127:3, it says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward." So my husband and I, we were going to church um, the entire time we were dating and then engaged, and of course after we were married as well. And so we were surrounded by families, all these people who had multiple kids. Um, Maybe it started to wear on us. Maybe it was just as we got a little older, we decided that, you know, kids weren't such a bad thing after all. And maybe it was Bible verses like this, where we see in the Bible how God thinks of kids and how they're actually important. And maybe we started to understand just a little bit more that really kids are a heritage. They are a gift that we can get from God. Now, when our kid was born, we lived still in our hometown. Both of our parents lived there as well. And my mom and his mom, they were both overjoyed to be grandparents and were more than willing to take our kid and take care of him whenever me and my husband were both working. Fortunately, that wasn't every day. My husband was on a rotating schedule. And so it was usually just 2 or 3 days out of the week where our kid needed to be watched by someone else while I was working and my husband was working, or while I was working and my husband was sleeping. So our mothers were fantastic for that, and they wanted to do that. So, for the first 3 years of his life, he spent a lot of time with his grandmothers or with other friends of ours instead of going to a daycare. And this was huge for us from a financial standpoint, but also from the standpoint that our kid would get to know his grandparents and he wouldn't have to go spend time with strangers. And overall, that was just a much better scenario we felt. What changed though is when he was 3 years old, we moved to another state. And then we no longer had grandparents or even friends to help us take care of him. And at that point in time, we needed to put him into a daycare. And I can tell you, having never looked at daycares before that point, that even looking for a daycare to put him in was really difficult. I remember one of the daycares we visited. It was just this mostly open building, um, and all the it was almost like little cubicles. And actually, I thought of them as like little pens because the whole overall building to me felt like a place where I had visited in school, where people kept pigs, in fact, little piglets, and they kept them in separate pens in this huge building. And I just could not get that picture out of my head. And when we visited that daycare, I was just about to um, decide I would never work again until he went to school because I just couldn't take it. I was like, if they're all like this, I can't do this. I can't send him to one of these things. We eventually did find a really good place for him to go. It had separate classrooms and not one big building like that. In fact, there weren't too many that were just big buildings, but this one had separate classrooms and they had them all divided up really well by their ages. And it was just a much better experience. It turned out to be the best fit for us. And then things were a little smoother. But fast forward till he was about 4 years old, and or nearly 4 years old, there were some difficulties. And the best way for me to describe to you what was going on is for me to actually read to you what I had wrote um, nearly 20 years ago during that experience. This morning, my kid didn't want me to leave him in his classroom at his school, actually daycare, but we call it school. Does that help us feel better about it? I could tell that part of him did want to be there. He was half smiling while acting out separation anxiety. His teachers comment that he was only doing it because his mommy was dropping him off. Of course, he's done the same thing with my husband a few times too. But that does beg the question of why. Why would he not want mama to leave him? Is it because children actually know better than adults today that they should be at home with their mothers? I read an account of a daycare worker who noticed that little girls would play doctor or some other career job and would rarely play with dolls or babies. The extent of their doll play was to take the babies to the nursery or place them in a crib and leave them there. She noticed that the little girls were competitive and not at all nurturing. They wanted to be like the boys. So he had been going to that daycare for several months when this had occurred, when he started, you know, being fussy and stuff when I would drop him off. And it just exacerbated my feelings, my hesitations in taking him there. Now, the hard part was is that at the time I didn't have a choice. We had moved at that point in time for my husband to go back to school, and it was a very intense program that required him to basically be available 24/7. So he couldn't work. In fact, I was the only one working, and the job that I had didn't pay enough to cover all of our living expenses with daycare on top of it. But we had to use daycare at that time, and so we actually had some living expenses built into our student loan, which made the student loan um, even even larger. um, but really, I couldn't stay home with him at that point. And so it was really tearing at me that I would have to drop him off at this place where it would seem like he didn't want to go, just for me to go to work. And that was hard because I'm his mother, and I started to learn more and more through that I wanted to be his mother. I wanted to be able to focus on that as much as I had done before, because the first 3 years of his life, even though even though I was still working and he was still staying with grandparents, um, I was able to spend more time with him than I actually was at that point in time. Um, Now, the hard part was is that he was 3 years old at when this was occurring, and it was actually a good thing that he was going and spending time with other kids, because up to that point he didn't have a lot of time spent with other kids. Um, he had a cousin who was 6 months younger than him, so he had her to play with for a while, and a friend of mine had a little boy who was a year older than him, and so there were some, but not many. And so I do think that that socialization among kids is actually a good thing. Um, and he did enjoy it, because when I'd go and pick him up, sometimes he wouldn't want to leave. Um, but other times, in fact, probably most times, he was happy to see me, and so he was willing to leave. But it was interesting to see that opposites of I don't want you to leave me here, and oh, I'm perfectly happy now. Um, but yeah, I did learn through that time that I cared a great deal about actually having time to be a mother for him. In fact, I had another entry in my journal that summarized exactly how I felt about wanting to be able to be a mother for him at that time. So here's that one. It frustrates me so much. I want him to be with me, and I want to teach him stuff. I want to have fun with him. I don't like dropping him off somewhere he really doesn't want to be after rushing things along to get him there. And I don't like that I'm not really teaching him anything at all. I don't like either not spending time with him on some days or forcing myself to do something with him after I've been at work all day, being nice to a bunch of strangers and taking care of other people's animals and giving my best and all my energy to them, and then having to give my family the leftovers, if there happens to be any leftovers, because some days there's not any. So, what my family gets from me is an irritable, aggravated, self centered, but at work, they get a mostly pleasant, helpful individual who does her job as perfect as possible. It's like I'm a Jekyll and Hyde. I hate it. And I hate it more for my kid now because it's not extended family or friends that he's staying with. It's people I don't that we don't really know who have to pay attention to 10 or 11 kids all at once. So those kids are all competing with each other for the teacher's attention all day long. I wonder how similar that is to sibling rivalry. I wonder if it's more destructive in a way. So there you can see that I had a lot of angst, a lot of frustration in the whole having to work and taking my kid to a daycare like that. Um, I didn't feel it as much when he was going to stay with his grandparents. Um, I still did think about it. I'd be at work and I'd think about how, you know, my kid was not with me, but sometimes it was just hard. And I can't tell you how many times I thought when I was at work, does any of this here really matter? Like, if I'm not here in the future, like, is it going to matter to these people at all? The time I spent with them and the focus I had on them, you know, and that's why I always say, careers can change and jobs can change and those things can go away, but your family stays. Your family is always a part of your life. And, when they say time's short and that the kids grow up quick, they are not lying. So, fast forward several years, my kid graduates high school, and it was great. I mean, it was a little bit of a fight to get him there. I had to make sure he would do his homework and all those things because he'd want to just blow it off. And so when he graduated, I felt like we had really accomplished something. Um, and his grandparents came to watch him graduate, and so they spent some days with us, and it was fantastic. And then when they went home, I learned a little thing about post high school graduation blues. Now, you'll hear people talk about postpartum depression. I don't remember if I ever had that, but I definitely had a post graduation depression or blues or whatever you want to call it. I spent 3 whole days, an entire weekend, crying almost constantly. It would start at the drop of a hat. It was it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And it was over the course of that weekend that I started to really realize that my kid's childhood was gone in the blink of an eye. And he was our only kid, so he was literally my first and last kid to do anything and everything. I was never going to have another kid do a high school graduation. I, you know, every he was just the only one. And so, here he was now suddenly grown up, and we were about to go on a completely other journey, but his childhood was gone. It was over. And I was never going to get any of that time back. In the few years that's passed since he graduated, I've thought a lot about um, the time I spent focusing on my career while he was a kid. And sometimes I think I focused all that time, all that energy on a career, and for what? Because by the time he graduated high school, I was already considering getting out of that career. Um, so, yeah, I just started wondering, why did I do that? Why did I not spend more, not always more of my time, but more of my focus on him? I did spend a lot of time thinking about work because in the last half of his childhood, I was a supervisor and then a manager. And so even if I wasn't at work more than 40 hours a week, in my mind, I was at work more than that. My, my mental focus, a lot of times, even when I was at home, was on issues I was dealing with at work and how to resolve those. And so a lot of times I wasn't focused on him and spending time talking to him about things as much as I could have. Because if I had not been so wrapped up in all the issues I had going on at my job, I could have had that focus, had that energy, put that time into my kid instead. So, that's just one of those things I realized after it was kind of all done, was that, you know, I couldn't get that time back. I couldn't redeem it. It was already gone. And my career was about to be over because I was switching careers. And yet my family was the one thing that was going to be forever. My family was the most constant, most consistent, meaningful thing that I had in my life. My career wasn't as meaningful in the end as the family was. And I had for so long had a totally wrong focus, or at least too much of a focus on the career. So things turned out all right. And having had one career end, and now that my kid is an adult, I can definitely say there's a couple of things I wished I would have learned sooner. First of all, focusing on my kid more and less on my career would have been far better. I might not have spent 40 hours a week at work all the time, but my mind was mentally running through issues that we had at work. I'd be at home and running through those things in my mind. And that's just, I could have had my focus on him and on the family instead. I mean, after all, I left my career and no one cared. I left that last job that I had inside that career and no one cared. But my family didn't change. My family was still the same family. And so they were the constant, they were more consistent. They were the thing that was actually more meaningful, the thing I should have focused on. If I would have done that, if I would have put more focus, more time, more energy into my kid and my husband, we could have made even more wonderful memories together. We could have done more things. I wouldn't have been so worn out and tired just from all those mental gymnastics I was doing. And we could have done more. And I could have poured more knowledge and life experience into my kid instead of pouring all that knowledge and life experience into the people I work with. Um, you know, I got to watch my kid grow up, but I only spent a limited amount of time with my coworkers or with the people that I supervised. And those employees may or may not have had any kind of appreciation or done anything with the knowledge or experience I tried to give to them. But everything that I would have, everything I did and everything I could have poured into my kid would have made a huge difference, because he's going to be in my life forever, Um, and he's the one that I actually get to see grow up and use that information and use that knowledge. The other thing I wish I would have known was to go ahead and try and have another kid, even if we weren't ready yet. Um, we didn't ever take it off the table per se, but unfortunately, menopause for me came very early, way earlier than it should have. Um, as it stands, I should have only just now started menopause, but this happened so much earlier. And I was having, of course, a lot of issues before the menopause finally hit, and that impacted the ability to have kids. And so, even if we had jumped fully into it and gone for it, I'm not sure we would have gotten pregnant. Um, so, regardless, having had an early menopause deprived me of the opportunity, um, and it didn't allow for any additional years to be able to get ready. And really, that weekend I spent crying after high school graduation um, was the beginning of me realizing how fulfilling it was to have had a kid. And that's when I really started to wish that we would have had at least one more, one more to increase our family experience and our adventures, and just the chance to have a bigger family. So, what I've said today, not a lot of people will admit to. Even if they acknowledge that they feel the same way, they're not likely to actually say it out loud. It's not popular to downplay career and to elevate kids in today's culture. Um, it seems kind of draconian to some. They think of it as being oppressive in some way. Um, our culture is so focused on girl bosses and what women can do in their careers, and the idea that um, they should not have children because children will hold them back from achieving their goals. I'm telling you my story to help you think beyond right now, beyond today, beyond the culture that we're in right now. And I'm telling you what no one told me, so that hopefully you don't find yourself one day in the future looking back with longing or with regrets about having chased a career and not having had kids, or not having had more kids. So if you're single, this is something for you to keep in mind, that you don't know when your hormones are going to go crazy. You don't know if menopause is going to come early. If there's any chance at all that you want to have kids, don't let a career keep you from considering that. Now, ideally, from my standpoint, from the biblical Christian worldview, you shouldn't be single and having kids. You should be married and having kids in that environment. And maybe you're already married, but you and your husband are not really thinking about kids. I'm telling you, there is nothing like it. Your career will never fulfill you. It will never give you a sense of identity in the same way that having had kids will just bring so much happiness and joy into your life. Um, Maybe you only have one kid, just like we only have one kid. I'm telling you, have another one. Have another one, have maybe three. Um, I didn't know. I really wish I would have done it. I had some other reasons, probably stupid reasons, for not pursuing having had another child. Um, Realistically, we should have tried to have our second kid right after my husband got out of school. But again, as I pointed out, it was kind of already too late at that point. Early menopause was hitting me. So, unfortunately, our bodies don't always understand our desires and they don't always play the game in sync with us. So, if you're worried about finances or whatever it is that might keep you from having a kid or having more than one kid, don't worry about it. I'm sure it'll work out. There's nothing like having the kids. Just believe me. And this is coming from a woman who, at one point in her life, did not want to have kids at all. And I am telling you, they're cool. They actually are really cool. I do want to make a point about how children are seen in the Bible. And one of those examples is with how Jesus placed an emphasis on kids in the Gospel of Luke. In Luke 18:15, starting at verse 15, it says, "Now they were bringing even infants to him that he might touch them. And when the disciples saw it, they rebuked them. But Jesus called them to him, saying, 'Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them, for such belongs the kingdom of God.'" So back in Jesus' day, kids were seen sort of as second rate citizens. To be honest, women were seen that way a lot as well. And this is one of those examples in the Bible where Jesus is not treating kids that way. It's showing that he doesn't see them as second rate citizens, he sees them as important. And, because they're also created in the image of God and they deserve to be loved. And Jesus loved them. And that's why he wanted them to be able to come to him so that they could, um, you know, have that interaction with him and get to know him. And, just like all of us as adults, Jesus also wants to have that relationship with children. There's a passage in the Bible, it's in Titus, where it says that older women should teach the younger women, train them in what is good and to love their husbands and to love their children. And that's where I see myself today. I have had life experiences that have taught me these things that I just mentioned to you. And I just want to pass that along to you because, as I mentioned before, these things that I've said, no one said to me. No one said to me when I was a teenager. They didn't say it to me when I was a young adult. They didn't say it to me when I had just gotten married. They literally never said it to me. And so that's why I'm sharing it with you all today, just to give you something else to think about, something a little different from the narrative that we hear in culture today. You know, we've got the Bible verses, that Christian worldview that points out how children are a heritage, that they're a good thing, how Jesus loves the children too, how he didn't treat them as second rate citizens, how he treated them important. Um, and so that's what I'm bringing to you today. The idea that while having a career and kids at the same time may not really work, um, because your mind will just be in two different places at the same time. Your focus is just, it's hard to have a focus on two different things. It's hard to split your time. And realistically, you will find yourself not wanting to split your time. I urge you to see kids in a different light. See your career in a different light, just like we talked about last week, and see kids in a different light as well. Don't be one of those who has such a overall focus and drive to have a career at all costs that if you have kids, you regret having them. That's horrible. I would hate to grow up and think that, my parents regretted having me. I would much rather grow up and think that, my parents loved me. And even if They didn't intend to have me at that moment, that they loved me and they cared about me, and they actually ended up having a more fulfilled life because they had me, versus having focused on something else or having not had me at all. It would be so much better just to know that you were loved. And so that's where we are today. I urge you, change your focus, think about it differently, love your kids, and spend as much time as you can with them, and have more than one if you can. So that's all we have time for this week. Next week is a bit of a mystery. I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about just yet. There's certainly a lot of topics out there that we could cover. And speaking of topics that we could cover, if there's something you would like to hear me talk about, something for us to discuss, please drop that in the comments and I'll take a look at it. And maybe your topic will be the one that I actually do next week. You never know. So, see you later.